If you haven't been here, what we've been doing is looking at various moments in the Gospels where Jesus is near the Sea of Galilee and something surprising and impactful happens. And today, we're going to be looking at a really interesting story together. And to get us going a little bit here, I wanted to ask this sort of question. I wonder if you've ever found yourself in a situation where something felt unbelievable, where you're like, I didn't expect this. This is bigger than I would have ever hoped for. How in the world did that just happen? And then maybe you get to a point where you're like, did that just happen? And then a few weeks later, you're sort of like, maybe I dreamt that, because it begins to be blurry. But it was like, whoa, I can't believe that thing actually happened. It almost feels unbelievable. Well, this summer so far, one of the things we got to do is go on vacation to visit our family. We're originally from California, and so we spent time with different pockets of our family and some dear friends. And one of the cool things, and I'll show you a picture of us. We're very happy, obviously. Yes, we didn't argue once in 13 days. We didn't show up late to anything. My children are just angels, and me and my wife have a perfect marriage. So you can imagine. It's a great vacation. That's called sarcasm, just in case you're not familiar. Anyway, okay, so we did have a great time. We spent time in Santa Cruz. We spent time in LA. We spent some time in the Central Valley of California, which is where we're actually from. And one of the coolest things happened. You can see the picture there on the left. That is in front of what's now called Crypto.com arena. I think it used to be called the Forum. And that's Kobe Bryant. We're kind of getting ready to go. We got tickets to a basketball game. And it was pretty awesome. We're big WNBA fans. We follow the Indiana Fever. We've been doing this for multiple years now. And it was like, well, maybe they're playing while we happen to be in California. And what would it look like to get tickets and have a good time? And so we looked, and they actually were playing. So we got tickets, and we were really excited. We get there, and it's pretty wild because about an hour before the event, someone dear to us informs us that the tickets we thought we had are not the tickets we were going to have, and pointed to the VIP door and said, Lydia, Dad, that's where you're walking through. And we went, what? Totally unexpected, totally wild, right? And it was one of those things where it took a minute to absorb, is this happening? Is this real? Are you joking? Like, what in the world are you talking about? And then it comes out a little bit later that you're going to have really, really, really good seats today, and you're going to have access to a couple of lounges. And we said, huh? Right? Like, this doesn't make sense, Well, let me show you what ended up happening. I've got like a 40-second video I want to show you really quick. There we go, better one. There we are. Thank you. That's Caitlin Clark, if you know who she is. 5 feet from me. Yeah, unexpected. Like, so unexpected. Never in my wildest dreams did I think that was going to be happening. We paid like $120 for our tickets, and that's not the ticket we walked in with. It was pretty incredible. In fact, watching that, I got like a little like, whoa, because it just doesn't feel real. And maybe this is a really grandiose example and really crazy, but one of the things, I want to show you the next slide. Here's our experience that night, right? That's us on TV, apparently. Every time the ball went our side, you can see like 3 seats and then the coaches on the bench of the Fever there. And the Fever played terribly, let me tell you. It was a horrible game. I mean, the game was just awful. Caitlin Clark was coming back from injury. I mean, it was awful, but it was epic. I mean, what in the world did we encounter? And the athleticism of these women was way crazier than watching on TV. It was like, I'm afraid of every one of you. You are. Well, it was awesome. And today's story that we're going to look at is one of those like unbelievable, did that really happen? What in the world kind of encounters that we find in the Gospels about Jesus when he encounters someone. And so as we talk about like these unbelievable things, these wild things that can happen, there's a story that I think really fits the bill. And 2,000 years later, it's such an incredible and out there kind of story that we're still talking about it, we're still processing, we're still wrestling with the implications of it. And so as we think about these sort of like big stories and big things that happen, these things that we don't think could possibly happen, but then we get to tell the story. I want us to think about one question throughout our time together today, and it's this: what story does your life tell? What story does your life tell? Like, we could tell a good story, we could have incredible experiences, and then what we do with those and how we live, of course, as followers of Jesus makes a massive impact. And so we're going to wrestle with what story does your life tell as we step into the story today. I want to set us up, though, with a little bit of context here. So this is the Sea of Galilee with me wearing Toms from 15-ish years ago with very wide ankles, apparently. This is one trip I got to be a part of years and years ago. This is a story that takes place along the edge of the Sea of Galilee. Of course, last week, Pastor David looked at the calming of the storm in the sea. And so today, we're just coming out of that space, and it's important to really highlight a few things that give us some more background info about what we're looking at today. As we have talked about in the past, the sea in ancient Judaism is a big deal. The sea is actually a metaphor for evil and chaos in the ancient world. It's why, like when you read Genesis 1, for instance, there's sort of this sense in the early couple of verses that the sea itself is like chaotic and needs to be tamed. And you can imagine if you're a person who encounters shipwrecks in the waters where, you know, they have no navigation equipment, it's easy to just have disaster happen, just like when Jesus had to come in and calm the sea. You can imagine why this becomes a metaphor for evil. Now, one way to think about it is this: the sea as chaotic evil. The chaotic waters of creation, they symbolize danger, disorder, sometimes even demonic activity, and the realm from which evil can emerge, while simultaneously remaining part of God's good creation. And so it's sort of a dual image, because the sea of any sort, any body of water, like, it's beautiful, awe-inspiring, but at this Jewish sort of metaphorical level, it's also, better watch out, it's a chaotic place, and sometimes evil lurks there. Let me show you an image that gives you sort of the ancient worldview of the early Christians and the ancient Jewish people. One way that they thought about the cosmos was this: that basically the earth was sort of covered by this dome, and I'm not going to walk through the entire graphic, but what I want you to notice is that where the land is, there's also, of course, sea, like we have today, whether it's lake or ocean, and then beneath there, it just keeps going down, down, down. And of course, in the middle of the graphic there, Sheol is sort of the realm or the holding place of dead folks in the Old Testament. And the worldview basically thought that as you go further into the sea, there's this area called the Great Deep. And out of the great deep could come some wild things. Sometimes the great deep is also in the New Testament translated as a word, abyss. So how does abyss relate? This is another definition for you. The deepest part. Next slide, please. It's the deepest part of the ancient waters of chaos. In Hebrew, the word was tahom, underneath the earth, associated with the realm of the dead and the imprisonment of demonic powers. And so there's sort of an evolving sort of understanding. So by the time of Jesus, the abyss becomes one of the ways in which evil sort of is contained, but also where evil can kind of come out of. Here's a bunch of passages in the Bible that make these connections for us. I already mentioned Genesis 1, of course. Psalms has various places where God tames the darkness of the waters, the evil of the water, and will even rebuke the waters, which oddly enough, last week in Pastor David's passage, that's exactly what Jesus does, right? He rebukes the sea. And then in today's passage, we're going to notice that there are demons who fear this place called the abyss. And then in the book of Revelation, there's a metaphorical beast that rises from out of the sea. And then we find that same beast rising out of the abyss. You can see the interrelatedness. And at the end of the Bible, it actually says, in the new created world, there's no longer any sea. And that's really essentially saying there's no more evil. And so this is sort of the evolution of this idea, and it's important that we have that in the back of our mind for today's passage because it's always lurking. The Sea of Galilee is where you get fish to feed your family and make a living, and it's also a place if things go wrong, you can find yourself swallowed up and possibly even tormented in ways that we hope no one has to face. And so, that's a bit of background. We're going to step into the passage. Here it is. Luke chapter 8. We're going to look at Luke's version. It also shows up in Mark and Matthew. It says this: Jesus and his disciples sailed to the Gerasenes land, which is across the lake from Galilee. As soon as Jesus got out of the boat, a certain man met him. The man was from the city and was possessed by demons. For a long time, he had lived among the tombs, naked and homeless. When he saw Jesus, he shrieked and fell down before him. Then he shouted, "What have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I beg you, don't torture me." So we encounter what by itself, on the surface, for some of us, would feel fairly unbelievable in modern day. To see this sort of scene is like, whoa. Another thing that's kind of crazy is Jesus goes from Galilee, which is on one part of the lake, and he sails to an area called the Decapolis, which is a bunch of cities, 10 cities, that are thoroughly non-Jewish. Jesus rarely will interact in the Gospels with someone who's not Jewish because of the nature of his mission. That's something that the apostles will go do when they take his message beyond the boundaries of Judea. But Jesus wants to go, and in Luke's Gospel, we see this tendency in Jesus over and over again, that Jesus is looking for the person on the outside, looking for the person who is not in, and wanting to come alongside and say, what if you have more dignity and worth than you could ever imagine? And so Jesus goes and he finds this man in a region that is unholy and challenging. And the first thing that happens is he begs Jesus, don't torture me. Don't torment me. If we keep on going into the next part of the passage here. He said this, verse 29, he said this because Jesus had already commanded the unclean spirit to come out of the man. Many times it had taken possession of him. So he would be bound with leg irons and chains and placed under guard. I'm going to pause here because you might think to yourself how terrible this would be for someone to be restrained in such a way. But many commentators I read this week were like, hey, terrible, yes, but recognize in the ancient world, this would have been an attempt to preserve the man as much as possible so that he couldn't hurt himself as easily, and obviously so he couldn't hurt others. There was some compassion baked into this because they didn't know what to do with him. But even though he's chained up, but he would break his restraints, and the demon would force him into the wilderness. Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" "Legion," he replied, because many demons had entered him. They pleaded with him not to order them to go back into the abyss. Okay. There's a lot to unpack here. We've just learned that there's not only one demonic force in this man, demonizing this man, but a legion of them. Let's process this out loud. So a couple things here. A legion is a Roman military unit, about 5,000-ish. It could give or take a bit there, but that's a good round number to keep in our minds. And we actually know historically the legion that was closest to where this incident took place is called the 10th Legion. And this legion was notorious for its inhumane acts at times, its sort of domineering over the people. And it's fascinating because I don't think that the Gospel of Luke and the Gospel of Mark put this detail in there just casually. It was a detail they needed to be in the telling of the story because this has so many implications for what is going on in the life of this man. This man had been dominated by a situation that had overcome him by the very forces that were giving Rome its power to conquer, that were giving Rome its power to cause harm, to subjugate people groups throughout the Mediterranean world. And something significant in this man's life seems to have opened him up under that set of conditions to be uniquely demonized. And Mark wants us to know there is a whole structure and system at work here that led to this man's condition. It's not just one day he decided, I would love to be a sinner. I'm going to just open my life up to all the bad things. It's complex. It's messy. And this is going to show itself a little bit more. One of the things that I found interesting here is there's a bit of a dance we have to do with this. In one commentary, it says this. This is Amy Jill Levine and Ben Witherington III. They wrote, "Legion's name signifies the incursion of foreign troops into an area. The violence the man does to his own body, together with his superhuman strength, suggests that he is acting out what the empire had done to his land and his people. Yet Legion's case is a distinct one. All the other exorcism accounts concern people who are embedded in apparently healthy familial and community systems. Thus, the name Legion may be more symbolic of the devastation of the man's condition, and yet that very name must speak to the view of empire as well. These are two things we have to hold together. And it's interesting, remember that whole thing about the abyss, right? Like, it's just fascinating because this legion of demons don't want to have to return to the abyss. We'll talk more about that. Verse 32. Verse 32 says this. A large herd of pigs was feeding on the hillside. What you need to know really quick here is so fascinating. I found this out this week. I thought it was so cool. The 10th Legion that is in the area during the time this story is taking place. Guess what their mascot is according to historical sources? A boar or a pig. Isn't that crazy? So hold that in your mind as well. So there's this whole systemic thing going on, and then the storyteller, Luke, telling this story, and Mark does the same thing, highlights, by the way, there's some pigs you need to know about. A large herd of pigs was feeding on the hillside. The demons begged Jesus to let them go into the pigs instead of the abyss. Jesus gave them permission, and the demons left the man and entered the pigs. The herd rushed down the cliff into the lake and was drowned. When those who tended the pigs saw what happened, they ran away and told the story in the city and in the countryside. People came to see what had happened. They came to Jesus and found the man from whom the demons had gone. In Mark's version of the story, we learn this is about 2,000 pigs. I mean, this is a huge, huge herd. I mean, you can imagine that these are part of the whole system of even feeding the soldiers that are in the area. There's an economic system here where the pigs now, 2,000 of them, have jumped into the sea. And if you're a local farmer who's making money from this legion, who's buying your food, this is a problem. This is a big problem. Let's compare a couple of the stories here. So in Mark, these demons beg Jesus not to send them out, or not to send them out of the country. In other words, let us stay around here somewhere. In Luke's version, they beg not to go into the abyss. And then in Matthew's version, asked if Jesus had come to torment them before the time, meaning that final time when they'll be judged forever and ever and ever. And it's really, really interesting here. I'm sure a combination of those things are what maybe happened in the moment, and different authors have different emphases and sources they're working with. But the point is, these demons would like to not go back where they came from. But isn't it fascinating that that's exactly what ends up happening in the story? Jesus lets them go into the pigs, but where do the pigs end up? They end up in the sea, and where does the sea eventually lead? To the abyss in their worldview. Yes, there's some metaphorical connections here, but it's really, I think, a powerful symbol. The demonic powers end up where they didn't want to go, because that is where they belong. In doing this, Jesus is speaking to the corruption of the system itself of the Roman Empire that had set this man up for all his suffering. It's also speaking against the evil of this Gentile superpower that is, well, symbolized by this unclean animal to the Jewish people of the time, a pig. And so Jesus says you could take your entire system, your entire way of empowering all these soldiers and doing all the things that corrupt God's good world, and you can just throw all of that into the sea where it belongs. Go back to the chaotic waters. Go back, because I am doing something new. The story, of course, isn't quite over. If that was incredible all by itself, one that we have to kind of blink a little bit and be like, what would that have been like? The story keeps going. It says this: he was sitting at Jesus' feet, the man, fully dressed and completely sane. They were filled with awe. Those people who had actually seen what had happened told them how the demon-possessed man had been delivered. Then everyone gathered from the region of the Gerasenes, and they asked Jesus to leave their area because they were overcome with fear. So he got into the boat and returned across the lake. Now, if you remember from last week, when Jesus commands the waves and calms the sea, one of their reactions there is also fear. Like, what power have we just encountered? What thing that just doesn't seem real, doesn't seem possible, have we just experienced? And if it's what we think it really is, I have a reason to be terrified possibly by that much power. For some, resistance to a Jesus-centered story is inevitable. It's inevitable. Jesus does the thing that we don't expect, that the people in the first century did not expect. And as a result, many of them are afraid, they're resistant, they tell Jesus, get out of here, we don't want you here, you ruined our economy for one thing, but also, we just don't want any trouble with you. Go. And it's true today, in so many ways, that sometimes we find ourselves resistant to some stories of what God is up to, and we find people in our world who are resistant, who are afraid. But at the same time, stories like this also create awe and possibility and hope. And so in the story, not everyone reacts with fear in that sense. But here's one thing I want to read here. James Edwards, he said this: the corollaries of the healing of the demoniac with the stilling of the storm are now wholly apparent. Both stories end in fear. Most people, I love this, if they were asked, would probably say that they would like to see a manifestation of God. But this story is a cold shower for such a religious pipe dream. When God manifests himself in Jesus, most people ask him to leave. I want to see a miracle. I want to see something amazing. I want to be able to say, I believe because this thing happened or this moment happened. And many people, it's not even enough. It's not even enough. This is why Jesus, sometimes people would say, just show us a sign. And he's like, even if I gave you a sign, it wouldn't be enough. But for the man who had encountered such suffering and now was completely in his right mind, had gotten dressed, it was more than enough. And the story ends this way. The man from whom all the demons had gone begged to come along with Jesus as one of his disciples. So the story begins, right, with this same man, well, the demons in him at least, saying, we beg you not to torment us, right? There's a different kind of begging. Here, he's like, I just want to be with Jesus. Please let me be with Jesus. I want to go where you go. I want to be with you wherever you are. Everything is different now, and it's only because of who you are and what you did for me. I want to follow you. But here's the thing. Jesus sent him away saying, return home and tell the story of what God has done for you. So he went throughout the city proclaiming what Jesus had done for him. Jesus says, instead of following me literally, you've been out here. Mark's version says it's not only wilderness, it's where the tombs are, right? He's been hurting himself and living this dehumanized existence for who knows how long. And for Jesus, the best next thing is, why don't you just go home? Why don't you go return to your family? Why don't you restore your dignity? Why don't you just tell the story of how God has been gracious to you and live into that story? For Jesus, this is as significant as someone choosing to follow him literally as a disciple. You see, I don't think these two things are pinned against each other for Jesus. He just knows this man needs to do something very important. He needs to go home, to bless his family, to restore their honor, to tell the story. Jesus thinks this is the better thing for him. And so he does that very thing. This man goes and tells the story over and over again. And I mean, why wouldn't he? The demonized man before and after Jesus, here's a little comparison chart. Before Jesus, he had many demons. Afterwards, of course, he didn't have any. He was naked before, then he was clothed. He didn't have a house, but was living in the tombs in a terrible area. He returns to his home. He fell down and shouted. He was sitting at his feet. He was seized and out of control. He was in his right mind or was sane. What a powerful story to tell. Now, after encountering Jesus, most of us do not have that dramatic of a story to tell. But that's really not the point. You see, the point is that Jesus shapes us in such a way that we all have a story to tell, a story to live, a life to live that models a particular transformation that is happening, a particular way of life that is changing, a particular set of circumstances unique to us. This man needed to go home because that was the unique place, the unique way God was going to use him. And you all have places where God invites you to be, and that's the unique way that you are invited to love and show the love and talk about the love of Jesus as well. But after encountering Jesus, the life we experience and the story that we tell matters so much. And you know, it's really fascinating. Did you catch this? Jesus said, the story says, return home and tell the story of what God has done for you. So he went throughout the city proclaiming what Jesus had done for him. Jesus says, go talk about God. And the man is like, yeah, I'll do that. I'm going to talk about you. The power of encountering Jesus is you encounter a human, unlike any human that will ever have existed in history, and simultaneously you encounter a God who is so much better than any of the alternative versions of God that you'll never encounter anyone better. And that's a story worth telling. And so, my friends, what story does your life tell? When you're at work, when you're at home, when you're at school, when you're with your family, when you're in private spaces, when you're in public spaces, what story does your life tell? And while it might not be crazy and over the top, that's really not the point. The point is, Jesus invites all of us to uniquely tell the story that he has written in our hearts and our lives. The story of him changing us, empowering us, loving us, helping us love others well, wherever we're sent, wherever we're called to be, wherever we are called to go. So this summer, where has Jesus placed you, and what story is your life going to tell? I'm going to invite you to stand, and I'm going to pray for us as we move towards some more worship together. So, Lord, as we think of this wild and outside of the lines sort of story about a man who was challenged in ways that most of us can't fathom, and yet who was restored in ways that many of us understand. Many of us understand that you are building us up from the inside out, that you're changing our hearts not just once, but throughout our lives. And as we open up our lives to the story you want to tell through us and in us, that our immediate sphere of relationships encounter your love through that story. Be it with words, be it with action. So God, as we continue to worship you, would you guide us into living out your ways? Thank you for your goodness to see us and to send us with your love. In Jesus' name, amen.